DeepSeek Moment series brought to you by the Center for China Analysis here at Asia Society Policy Institute. I am Lizzie Lee, a fellow on Chinese economy here at CCA. Today's conversation explores one of the most dynamic and fascinating fronts in the US-China tech rivalry, the race for dominance in large language models, or LLMs. From OpenAI's rise to DeepSeek's breakthrough, and now to Alibaba's renaissance with its new AI-LM model, Quinn, we are witnessing a major realignment in AI power dynamics. US tech policy, especially as Washington doubles down on hardware export controls, have had major implications for China's AI ambitions. As we just saw from Reuters exclusive today, US policymakers seem to be targeting DeepSeek's military ties and ways, revoking chip making waivers in China. Joining us to break this all down are two stellar journalists. One is Karen Hao, reporter at The Atlantic and author of the book, The Empire of AI, now a New York Times bestseller, and one of the most fascinating and most insightful voices investigating AI frontier. And then we have Jing Yang, Asia Bureau Chief at The Information, whose reporting offers an unmatched window into China's corporate AI landscape. Welcome, Karen and Jing.
Thank you for having us.
And Jing, let's just set the stage first. We've seen this head-to-head tug of war between the United States and China in LLM development. So how did we actually get here? What's a short but dramatic back history of this global race?
Yeah, sure. When ChatGPT was launched in late 2022, what happened in China was this tremendous soul searching that happened immediately in the tech and AI community in China because remember, China was a leader in the computer vision age in the mid 2010s, and at that time, I think there was a big belief in China that China, because the vast troves of data backed by the huge population that China has. China is gonna be like the clear leader in AI, is gonna prevail, and then I think that is also sort of summarized in Dr. Kai-Fu Lee's book, AI Superpower, right, where he predicted that China is gonna prevail over the US in the future development of AI, and then that obviously did not happen with the launch of ChatGPT. And so what happened right after that was, if we can differentiating two camps. The first camp would be the incumbent tech heavyweights from Alibaba to ByteDance to Baidu. And then the other camp would be the startups. So what happened concurrently at the time was that the tech heavyweights started, investing heavily and making sort of necessary organizational changes to make their organization be more nimble at responding to challenges like this. And on the other hand, there's just so many startups that just mushroomed, or claiming to develop their own, or sort of China's answer to GPT, and then that phenomenon ran throughout 2023. That the market became suddenly so crowded and so competitive. Chinese media coined the term the battle of 100 models to describe what happened. And then quickly going to the second half of 2023, what happened was that we had ByteDance emerged as sort of the leader with this Doubao chatbot in China. And then we also have this new term coined now called the six little dragons, meaning the six leading startups developing their own proprietary LLMs in China. And then before you know it, what happened toward the second half of 2023 was that Alibaba finally caught up, which we can talk about later on, and then that sort of victory was quickly upstaged in early this year by DeepSeek's breakout success. And then Alibaba then, as we know, which we'll talk about later, in April released, the latest updates, a suite of models of all different sizes and specifications called Quinn 3. And now we're waiting to see what DeepSeek can offer next. And then in the meantime, when it comes to the six little dragons, some of them started to struggle, right? We saw 01.AI, founded by Kai-Fu Lee, essentially has been folded into Alibaba. And on the other hand, some of the others are sort of, people I talk to in the industry suggest that, if some of them do not find like a sustainable revenue stream, then they're gonna also just be obliterated very soon as well. Excuse me. So that's where we're at.
Fascinating. Yeah, fascinating. And what's especially striking, and what we are here to unpack today, at least to me, is China's leap into open source AI with Alibaba's Oqin and also DeepSeek, as you mentioned, leading the pack. Is that going to be a paradigm shift? What are the implications? That's a fascinating topic I think our audience is also interested in. But Karen, I wanted to take a step back and clarify some terms for our audience. What exactly distinguishes open source from closed source AI models? And can you just walk us through the core differences, the trade-offs, and who are the key players in each camp globally?
Yeah, usually open source traditionally refers to models that where their code is completely online, like the weights of the models are online, as well as the data, so the ingredients that go into training the models. Typically, we don't actually see many genuinely open source models in the sense that many different players end up being open weights, but they do not actually give the recipe, the data, or the instructions for how they actually developed their models. And closed source refers to the exact opposite. There's no information, really, no visibility at all into how the model was developed, what kind of architecture it used, what kind of data it was trained on, and any of the particular steps along the way in the post-training fine-tuning of the model development. And in terms of the global leaders, we have, of course, OpenAI and Anthropic in the US that are really dominating in closed source development. And in open source, we have DeepSeek and Llama, but open source with an asterisk that they don't necessarily actually open source their data. And there are kind of specific arguments that each side uses around why open or closed is better. So in the closed source arguments, these companies say that ultimately this is a very powerful technology, and in order to make sure that it goes well, we need to keep the information under lock and key. We do not want it to get into the hands of bad actors. That's what those companies usually argue. Whereas open source developers, they argue that if we bring this technology to the hands of more people, we give the instructions for how to develop these technologies to the hands of more people. Not only will that foster healthy competition, more entrepreneurship, and more alternatives to AI technologies, we can also study scientifically how these models actually work and the limitations of these models as well, and build up a better, more rigorous foundation for advancing and progressing AI development. And so this is, the AI industry is not the first to clash along open versus closed lines. This has been a long-standing debate and tension throughout software development history. And so we're kind of just seeing many of the arguments from before replay out in the AI era.
Fascinating. And just so you know, just for my curiosity, in your book, The Empire of AI, you also highlight OpenAI's kind of near-religious focus on AGI or artificial general intelligence. Why do you think has OpenAI go down on AGI as its North Star? Do you think that focus has helped OpenAI or hinder them? Why is there this push doubling down on AGI as OpenAI's North Star?
Maybe I should first define what artificial general intelligence is, which is trickier than it seems. So AGI generally refers to a pinnacle of AI research, this idea that we will someday fully recreate human intelligence within computers. And this has long been a dream within the AI research field, all the way back dating back to when it was first founded in 1956. Back then it was just called AI, and now we differentiate current day products and services called AI with AGI, this new term, general intelligence. But one of the challenges of AGI in general is that we don't really have scientific consensus around where human intelligence comes from. So trying to recreate human intelligence in computers then necessarily becomes very confusing. And there's been constant debate through the decades about what kind of techniques it would take, what benchmarks or goals or signals would we actually need to see to determine that we've actually gotten there. But the reason why OpenAI originally conceived of themselves as an AGI lab was in part because of as you mentioned, that I describe in the book, this quasi-religious belief that this is possible. Recreating human intelligence will be possible and it will be inevitable, and that this is going to have a civilizationally transformative impact, either in the positive or negative direction. Either it will bring us to utopia or it will kill all humans. And the original founders had with among them Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Ilya Sutskever, the first chief scientist, and Greg Brockman, the chief technology officer. Elon Musk and Ilya Sutskever were very much believers in this idea that AGI is going to be possible and it could be civilizationally transformative. And so part of the reason that OpenAI has pursued it for so long is because there continue to be people within the company that genuinely believe that this is the thing that they need to work on, that they were brought to this earth to advance and usher in the next part of civilization, Civilization 2.0. And there are, of course, then other considerations that have layered on top of that genuine belief. Evoking the idea of AGI is very commercially helpful because it sounds like a very powerful and possibly extremely lucrative technology. It's also very politically helpful because when you are testifying to Congress about the importance of not regulating the company, saying AGI a bunch of times can be helpful in that regard as well. And so this term and its utility has sort of continued to evolve within the history of the company, but it has maintained its utility over time.
This recreating human intelligence, how much of that you think, Karen, is the complex held by some people? It's like a man wanting to play God.
Yeah, this is something that I was actually reading a history paper from the nuclear age where it was like a feminist reading of why men were so obsessed with building nuclear weapons. And there was one hypothesis was that they just have envy about the ability to like recreate life because women are the only ones that can birth new life. And it was funny because I was reading this paper and I had an interview with Kara Swisher where Kara Swisher also said that she believes that men's obsession with recreating AGI is the same exact thing, that they have this envy of the fact that women are the only ones that can give birth to new life. And so they are, whether they're trying to recreate God or whether they're just trying to recreate intelligence in, another way, I think there's something there to the fact that throughout history, regardless of the era and regardless of the technology, many scholars kind of hone in on this particular male obsession to recreate something.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
reason I'm asking, sorry, excuse me, Lizzie, is because I recently have been reporting on the humanoid robotic space, and we had the information just I just had a big feature published with in collaboration with my colleague in the US about sort of how humanoid robotics is shaping up to be the next frontier in US-China tech war. And when I was doing research for that story, the same thing, same argument was brought up about sort of, why does the robot, why do robots have to be shaped like human,
Yeah.
right? And an arm can also work, or has been working. So then that was this man wanting to play God, creating is something looking exactly like self was sort of brought forward as a reason.
Fascinating. Well, thank you both for that really fascinating thought. And I mean, to your point, Jing, I mean, if we contrasted the US approach to China's approach, we see Chinese players seems to be much more pragmatic, right? Most of the robotics focuses on industrial robots, and most of the AI focus is very much on real world applications, right? Verticalized tools, practical deployment. Is that a smarter play? What's actually kind of fueling and driving China's approach to AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the way I would think about it is that instead of thinking it's sort of all the Chinese tech companies, entrepreneurs wanting to be smart, it's more like they're forced to because of how cutthroat the competition is. Remember earlier I talked about this battle of 100 models. It's not the first time in, sort of the brief tech industry in China. We saw this as early as in the early 2010s when there's like so many companies in China that want to build like China's Groupon, remember group buying? So then at one point, there were more than 5,000 company startups that offers, group buying services. And then 1 year later, there's about a few hundred of them left. And then we saw again the same thing with the EV battle, right? So I think I ask the people why, whenever there's something emerging and then everybody in China, you have this phenomenon where everybody just rushing and then this like crazy gold rush. And then you end up having too many companies, startups vying for capital and vying for market share in a very short space of time. And the end result is that is this brutal competition. So then in order to survive, you have to find a product market fit very quickly. You have to find ways to generate revenue very quickly. Otherwise, you would lose out on the next funding round. Then otherwise, your investors will easily go to the next startup. If I may to use an example, Safe Superintelligence, the company founded by Ilya Zaskever, like the company has raised $2 billion, valued at 32 billion, received an offer from Meta to buy it. All of this time, it hasn't told the world what it's actually building, what it's actually going to do. And that it is very hard for me to imagine the same thing would happen in China. So then basically, I think the competition in this case, although people complain, have caused a lot of like wasteful resources, right? But the end result is that only the most competitive, the best product run by the best people can prevail. And I think that's what happened.
Great point. Thank you so much, Jing. And from your reporting, it seems that China is now betting big on open source, LLMs, which is topic of the day. And why is that happening now? Is it related to policy or the private sector dynamics, as you mentioned? What are the internal drivers? Is it technological? Is it regulatory? Is it geopolitical that are pushing this shift?
Yeah, I think we first have to maybe give the credit in the short history. We should, I think we should give credit to Llama, right? When everybody was, rushing to build their proprietary models, Llama sort of was the first major company to be firmly in the camp of open source, right? And then in China, actually at the beginning, companies, from tech titans like Alibaba and Baidu to startups, closed source or proprietary was the way to go. And then what happened was I think DeepSeek really sort of changed. There are two factors. The first is the DeepSeek factor. So DeepSeek's model started to gain traction and a buzz in the AI community around the world from about I think last summer, like a year ago. And I think companies like Alibaba, sort of took note of that and then started to think maybe we should prioritize more on open source instead of closed. Because at the beginning, Alibaba was like, we're gonna just do both and see, which one works better. And then the second factor would be this chip constraint. Chinese companies simply just cannot afford to stockpile this many NVIDIA chips because it's just simply not, legally cannot be sold to China, right? So then it is often being said that the breakthrough that DeepSeek achieved is the textbook example of, necessity is the mother of innovation. I think that can be applied to the broader open source sort of a edge that China has managed to accomplish so far. And then you see that after DeepSeek became a global sensation, Not only Alibaba, also, in the meantime, reorganize these resources to focus more on open source. Baidu, as well as some other LLM startups in China, also have been offering open source versions of their existing models. I guess the big question mark I would have, which I don't have an answer to, is where is ByteDance standing on all of that? But I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it seems like ByteDance is still in the closed off camp, at least for now. But I mean, as Jing mentioned, the United States has leaned heavily on export controls, especially around chips and hardware, as the main lever in the tech race against China. So Karen, in your reporting and in your interviews with people, have these tools been effective? And what are U.S. firms saying internally about these restrictions?
Yeah, well, in Washington, I think there is starting to be a sense that these tools were not effective. There is a lot of debate and anxiety now that, in fact, using export controls was the reason why we suddenly had a DeepSeek moment, as Jing said, that created that necessity and therefore led to more innovation than what has happened in the US around being able to achieve remarkable AI progress with far fewer computational resources. But that said, the US companies have very aggressively publicly tried to continue to assert the fact that export controls was not a failed strategy, and they have continued to try and push the US government to restrict export controls even further and double down on that strategy. But there are definitely within the companies major concerns about the fact that they are now more vulnerable. OpenAI has, publicly already admitted that they might have called it wrong on the open source, closed source debate. And Sam Altman has said that he is working on trying to figure out what to open source within OpenAI. And they've said that there's an open source model that is coming soon. Of course, we haven't really seen what that is yet. But some of the sources that I speak to at the company, they don't, one of them dramatically was like, I don't even know if OpenAI is going to be around for that much longer because there's the competition from open source models is just heating up so much that how can we actually continue to justify the consumption of so much capital? And when ultimately there are just all of these incredibly talented researchers distributed across many different companies and distributed across China that are all working on things that are ultimately eating away at our pie. And that was a particularly dramatic opinion within the company, but it does sort of speak to this bubbling and growing anxiety that the strategy that OpenAI has tried to approach and the strategy that OpenAI and like-minded companies have tried to engage in the US government with these export controls has just dramatically backfired.
Fascinating. And I mean, to both of you on the point of export controls, I mean, China's open source pivot could potentially be a clever end run around hardware bans. Is that China's workaround? How much can it actually lessen the blow of US restrictions? Are there tools in Washington's toolbox to slow China down on the open AI front? Sorry, on the open source AI front.
I'll take a stab at this first. I think what I have observed in the last, I think since the beginning of the year, not only DeepSeek's breakthrough has been really sort of talked about in the DC and the overall US sort of discourse as such a formidable existence. So has Huawei's sort of so-called chip breakthrough as well. However, I feel like the discourse just like in the space of 12 months changed very drastically from like, oh, America is the clear leader, China is far behind, to China is very quickly catching up, and we're gonna have to come up new ways to contain China's rise. I actually think it's neither. like the reality is much more nuanced. For example, we did a story a couple of weeks ago about despite all the breakthrough that Huawei, Cloud Matrix 3665 chip plus rack system has been held. Actually, in China, you don't see a lot of customers, you don't see a lot of tech companies actually willing to adopt Huawei's systems and chips. And there are many reasons, but one of the reasons being, despite NVIDIA has to continue to curtail the performance of its chips being allowed to sell to China. CUDA, a company software system, is really like the gold standard when it comes to, coding and running your chips. And as you know, DeepSeek, I mean, one of the reasons DeepSeek has become so successful and eking out so much efficiency is because the company and its engineers have been absolutely masterful at using CUDA. And then they worked during the process closely with the NVIDIA team as well, And then I think while China is moving toward the goal of winning itself completely of American semiconductor technology, I do think that it's not going to happen anytime soon, and there are still a lot of roadblocks that China and companies like Huawei and all the other sort of NVIDIA alternative players in China have to overcome. And then before we get there, I do think that the continued tightening of the export control on China will have a more short-term impact on continued AI development in China as well. For example, DeepSeek, after DeepSeek became a global sensation with the R1 model, but we haven't seen the R2 model, the successor model, being released. And when and if that is going to be that is released, based on our reporting, that there is going to be with the recent H20 ban, with recent NVIDIA H20 ban in China, there's going to be an immediate problem facing the cloud providers deploying R2, because they don't have enough powerful chips to run the models and for commercial, for enterprise deployment. And then these are sort of obstacles I think cannot be ignored.
Fascinating. And Karen, your take, please.
Yeah, I think I would just add one thing, which is our former colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, they came out with this really great story recently talking about some of the more creative workarounds that companies are now engaging in China to get access to chips, including not just figuring out new ways to tunnel more chips into the country, but actually just taking data on server racks and bringing it outside the country. And so I think that indicates just the degree to what Jane was saying, that there is still that pressure being felt within the Chinese tech industry in the short term, and there are plenty of companies that are still trying to figure out how to get around the tightening that is happening. But I think in the long run, the continued tightening just means that there will be further momentum within the Chinese tech industry to completely strip their reliance off American technologies. And it's sort of a matter of time, essentially, for when they will ultimately be able to completely sever their dependence.
Thank you. And Jean, back to your earlier reference to this 100 model horse race. Currently, the global spotlight seems to be on DeepSeek and Quinn, but are there new players or dark horses on the horizon? Who else should we be watching when it comes to China's AI model scene?
On the ALM space, I do feel like just as in the US, I think the war is over. We may see sort of small battlefields here and there. For example, I think Quinn and DeepSeek are still like sort of rivaling each other. And if and when ByteDance, releases an open source model, maybe that'll also, bring another iteration to the competition. However, I think by and large, the war is over in the sense that we know that these are gonna be like the players. And then I find it very unlikely to see another black horse, for example. However, the battle now has moved both in the US and China to building AI agents, right? And that's where things get really interesting because one of the reasons that Quam becomes so popular is that in both the US and China, a lot of the startups that are building agentic AI applications actually prefer to use Qwen over Llama because Qwen simply is better. However, in the closed sourced world, I think based on the entrepreneurs I've talked to, they still hail Anthropic cloud models as a number one when it comes to building software application on top of it. And then China has, sort of accumulated a lot of really smart, like the sort of China's integration with the world over the last 3, 4 decades. The result of that is, a lot of very smart entrepreneurs that speak both the Chinese language and the Western language, right? I'm not talking about language in per se, but the tech and the culture and everything. So while China traditionally has not been good at the environment in China for nurturing like a enterprise software is just not great compared to the US. However, China has had a lot of successes, in the social media, the mobile internet era with a lot of so-called super apps. And these people, people who worked at ByteDance or Tencent, whatever, right, and I studied in the US before, now are all branching out and building their own consumer agent consumer, agentic apps targeted at the consumer use to the global audience. We've seen, for example, Manus is a recent example, but there are a lot more as well. And I think that is going to get really interesting because at the end of the day, no like ALM developer it is gonna call itself success if its models are not being used by actual, enterprises and startups, right?
Yeah, fascinating and lots of fluidity in this space. And but Karen, back to your book. As you reported in the book, OpenAI's own arc has been anything but boring, right? From its nonprofit roots to Microsoft's massive investment and all the boardroom drama that followed. What do you think is the key takeaway for AI entrepreneurs from OpenAI's evolution? Is it a cautionary tale? Is it a model to emulate? What are the key takeaways from your research into OpenAI?
One of the things that I very strongly feel about OpenAI's particular approach to AI development is that they chose to take a very costly path. And I don't just mean financially costly, I mean environmentally costly, costly to labor. When they ultimately chose this big data, big computational power approach to AI development. And the reason why I call my book Empire of AI is because I argue that OpenAI is essentially empire building. They're not necessarily actually building a technology that's going to be broadly beneficial to people. They are using this technology as a tool to continue consolidating extraordinary amounts of resources, extraordinary amounts of money, capital, talent, and power, both economic and political power. And that is not necessarily the actual vision of AI development that we would want to see in the 21st century moving forward to help humanity progress as a whole. And so the thing that I hope entrepreneurs would learn is that there's this whole other space of AI development that needs to be explored. Then we need to shift away from this more colossal resource consumption based approach of AI development towards things that are more task specific, more data efficient, more energy efficient. And that's actually where I see the real impact of AI being able to be broadly diffused across many different sectors. If you just think about it, most sectors are actually data scarce sectors, like the manufacturing industry, the healthcare industry, education industry. These are actually very data scarce areas. And in order to actually unlock potential for AI technologies, we need to be building data efficient AI tools that can be trained on those data scarce environments. And so I hope that entrepreneurs will stop trying to compete with a vision that OpenAI set forward and start defining a new vision that will ultimately end up in a I think more broadly in a future where the benefits are more broadly distributed among everyone.
Fascinating. And Jing, back to you. Now we sort of think of DeepSeek's breakthrough, Alibaba's Quinn revival as great success stories, but companies have their own frictions. What are some of the internal tensions that you have observed, reporting? And like Karen, what lessons, red flags, takeaways other AI companies can take from their journeys?
So I think Alibaba's sort of a journey with the Quant actually serves as a great sort of business school case study. Now, in the sense that some of the Alibaba's earlier misfortune turned out to be to be helping is the current wing that we've seen, right? We know that Alibaba just sort of emerged from this brutal regulatory crackdown in China. And then at the beginning of 2023, the company announced it's going to break itself into 6 different units. While 12 months later, that effort basically, just didn't really materialize. What happened in the process was that Alibaba Cloud and the teams within the cloud division that are building the AI models have no control and then over what other business units are doing. They also have no control. They have no decision-making power. They cannot go to, say, Taobao, the e-commerce business unit, say, you have to use Quinn. You cannot use, like, say, another company's model. Right. So that when they realize, as we reported, when the Alibaba's LLM team realized that our model sucks so much that even our colleagues don't want to use it, that was like, okay, we really have to do better. And then the same thing, you don't see the same thing happen in sort of the Alibaba's counterparts in the US or the other tech giants that are sort of, do not necessarily have this kind of internal competition. It's hard for me to imagine. I don't know for sure, but I guess, for example, Google would not want its software apps team to build anything on, like, say, cloud models, I imagine. So I think that really was the earlier tension that helped Alibaba now come on top. And then the other thing is that I don't have, again, this is something I don't have the answer to, but I think we'll probably see something, or we're trying to report on this, or somebody else will have the answer, which is that Alibaba in from 2023, aggressively invested a bunch of this LLM startups as well. I think is one of the reasons was to actually Alibaba Cloud was sort of struggling at the time. So when they invest in some of these startups that have huge demand for compute, they're basically using a very it's basically acquiring customers at a very sort of with the investment, with the equity investment, right? And on the other hand, was, what if, I think Alibaba's leadership goes, what if our own efforts actually fail to take off, and at least we would have invested in a field that actually would hopefully, come on top. So now that Alibaba has come on top, and some of the startups, investors are either flailing or, just doing sort of being moribund, then I think the future will be very interesting, right? Would Alibaba, I don't know, I'm just purely speculating without knowing anything, but would Alibaba have to acquire some of them at a very low cost, like this acquire thing that is being happening in the AI industry in Silicon Valley as well, or something else would happen, right? And I think this is the next point of attention that I would be on the lookout for. And then back to DeepSeek, I think DeepSeek has become so successful because one of the biggest reasons, I think, and as we reported, is that the company never opened itself to any external funding. Even after it became a global sensation, it still declined, all the so-called gentleman callers on its doorstep, right? And so then the whole time the company basically, DeepSeek was working like a little AI lab. And it's a bunch of, led by the very idealistic CEO Liang Wenfeng. The DeepSeek team is overall very idealistic and deeply believe in open source. And then as the company gets bigger, as it tries to keep outdoing itself, And as the news continue to tighten around export control, will DeepSeek at some point need to raise funding from external investors? You know, I think that's something, that's the other sort of point of tension that I want to flag.
Fascinating. And let's close by looking forward. Karen and Jing, what are your best predictions for the LLM landscape, maybe 3 years out or even 1 years out, if that's possible? Who's rising, who's falling, and how might the US-China competition in this space evolve?
I generally don't like making predictions because I philosophically don't believe that like the future is written and things are inevitable. But if the current trajectory does not change, I think I actually believe that in a few years' time, we will start seeing more integration again between the US and China AI development, in that we are already seeing, for example, Silicon Valley companies just integrate DeepSeek into their stack because it's just cheaper and better. The Microsoft Bloomberg just had a really great feature on Microsoft where it talked about the moment that DeepSeek first came out, Satya Nadella ordered his team to analyze DeepSeek and figure out whether or not it was safe to bring onto Microsoft Stack. And then once they'd made that determination, immediately put it on. Perplexity integrated DeepSeek into some of their offerings. I was speaking with an investor in Silicon Valley just the other day that said most startups these days, if they're trying to build a wrapper around AI models, they will first download some of the open source models, Llama and DeepSeek, and tinker around with it while they're rapidly prototyping and iterating. And I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that, even if people are not necessarily going to be bragging about it openly. But that's just the nature of software development, is that it's really hard to actually contain it within borders. And there is going to continue to be more and more interesting models coming out of China. And there will be more and more of that dialogue happening potentially behind closed doors.
Fascinating. Jing, please.
Like Karen, I also generally refrain from making predictions because especially when it comes to AI, because things move so fast, right? The prediction we make today really is based on what we know today. And then before you know it, next week there could be something that happened that completely, that make us look really stupid. Um, so so to be conservative, I think what I'll say, because I think Karen really covered it very well. The one thing I would add is that I think we will see at some point a very successful AI software application built, whether it's a wrapper or more than a wrapper, but it's based on either Alibaba Qwen or DeepSeek R2, like basically a China developed open source model.
Fascinating. And, thank you and appreciate that journalistic rigor you bring to this conversation. But most of all, thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. As a reminder, this is part of our China's DeepSeek Moment series here at CCA, out for future events as we continue to explore the surprising shifts in China's tech innovation and what they mean globally. Once again, I'm Lizzie Lee, and on behalf of Ask